Hello Animorphs fans and welcome back to AniLysis. Today we were supposed to look at Steve, Elfangor's friend. But I'm doing both of his friends. This is from the Elfangor Chronicles. And you'll understand why I've actually included Bill in here as well, as we go over the one quote where these two characters are at all relevant. I finished college at an accelerated rate. Not surprising, since I was a century or two ahead of all the professors. I began graduate school, but I was bored there too. I had a job writing software for primitive human computers. It was the 1980s on Earth, and humans were just beginning to understand computers. I met a lot of humans who were working in the computer field. My human friend Bill used to come over to my room and we would exchange ideas. It was hard for me to simplify my knowledge enough for him to follow. Everything had to be explained in simple human terms, using words like window to explain a childishly simple concept. And my human friend Steve thought it was a huge breakthrough to use symbolic icons and a simple pointer rather than a lot of complex language. This is it. This is basically towards the end of the AniLysis Chronicles, where Elfangor is talking about his life living as Elfangor. And of course he's still got his AniLysis mind, his AniLysis intellect, his technological knowledge, which is highly advanced, much more so than human knowledge. And so we're introduced to Steve and Bill. Not actually technically introduced to them, but they're spoken of. And my policy on this channel, this AniLysis stuff, is not to do AniLysis videos on real people. For example, Arnold Schwarzenegger is mentioned a few times in this series, but because he's a non-fictional person, I'm not going to cover him. So you might be asking, why have I got a picture of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates on the screen? They're very clearly references to Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. Why are you therefore doing an AniLysis on them? Because they're not actually named in full, meaning that theoretically they're fictional. They're not actually named in full. It could be Bill Bates and Steve Fobbs. So I have to cover them. It's not explicitly Arnold Schwarzenegger or Bill Clinton. It's just Bill and Steve. Nerdy kids at college who Elfangor talks about computer stuff with. So yes, I'm covering them. It's going to be brief though. I'm going to try and make it as interesting as possible, and I've actually done some research, so I think it will be quite interesting. It's funny because Bill Gates and Steve Jobs didn't so much found, but Microsoft Windows was a Bill Gates headed thing. And Steve Jobs was head of Apple, which of course, Macintosh computers and iPhones, like the one I've got here. This is also a Windows software that I'm using. So their influence is felt within this very room. Now the story of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates is, many people say that they don't like each other. And there are reasons for it. So Steve Jobs accused Bill Gates of stealing his idea. That idea was effectively the mouse, the cursor. Rather than typing in directions to your computer like on a DOS program, you use a mouse cursor to go around the screen and click buttons. He released the Apple Lisa, and that was the first one of the first major computer systems to have the mouse cursor technology. And Bill Gates saw it, and after the Apple Lisa had bad sales, Bill Gates basically took the idea and was successful with it for Microsoft Windows. Steve Jobs was rather peeved. And they did have conversations afterwards where they were nice to each other, but a lot of the times it was very, two big businesses competing against each other. They're not going to be the best of mates. They might have a bit of banter and joke on the side, but largely they're competing against each other and stealing each other's ideas. So it's that sort of thing going on. The funny thing here is, though Steve Jobs got angry at Bill Gates for stealing his idea of a cursor, he actually stole it from Douglas Engelbart, who put the technology into his Xerox computer. So, yeah. Considering the quote that we've read, where Elfangor says that Steve thought that the use of a pointer rather than typing in instructions was a major breakthrough. Yeah, no. Unless Elfangor was disguised as Douglas Engelbart at the time, no. Justice for Douglas Engelbart, the true originator. Apparently Steve Jobs basically stole a lot of his ideas anyway. Like the design for this, well, I can't remember the guy's name, but it wasn't Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs basically just said, yeah, it was my design. And what's even funnier about this, the joke itself isn't funny. But at the same time, it's one of those jokes that doesn't feel like it's meant to be funny, rather just sort of, you know, when you look at something you go, huh, huh. It's more that, rather than, ha ha. It's just, huh. So what, Bill and Steve, fictional Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, were apparently bezies with Elfangor in the 80s, which was about the time that they were both really delving into the world of technology. And the funny thing here, another funny thing, yes, I know, is that this was about the time as well where they parted ways and their rivalry started in the 80s, when they were both starting to get into computers. And I had an idea while doing research for this. I thought, wouldn't it be great if somebody did like a fan fiction sitcom where these three, Elfangor, Bill and Steve, were living the uni life, the college life together, and you just got all the drama. And it turned out that Elfangor was the reason they started to dislike each other and split apart and started accusing each other of stuff. It was Elfangor just in the background being like because the thing that Elfangor says he teaches Steve about here is the very thing that Bill allegedly stole from Steve that made them not like each other. So it was Elfangor's fault that there was the split between Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, which caused the competitiveness, which probably means that the very reason we have iPhones is because of Elfangor. Thank you very much, Elfangor. I can play Sudoku wherever I go. Elfangor would have probably known them around this time, because this, I believe, was either in the late 70s or the 80s, this picture here. Hence why they're still sitting down together and laughing. I think this was before it got a bit... before Elfangor got involved. So yeah, they'd have looked like this. Yeah, they do look like college students. I do also like as well that these two are always accused of stealing ideas. And the book basically implies that they didn't come up with the ideas themselves. Elfangor basically gave them these ideas, which I think is actually... I do find that bit quite humorous, actually. And was it intentional? But I think, to be fair to the authors, they wrote this book in the 90s. And that was before we really started to know what these two are like. Because let's go over that, right? So Elfangor's friends, both of them turn out to be borderline sociopathic arseholes. You judge a person by the friends they keep. Elfangor is apparently a complete knob. Because Steve Jobs, he was like he went off for a spiritual journey early in his life, but that was no reflection on what he was actually like as a boss. Apparently, he was borderline sociopathic. And I mean, from what I saw, the things I've heard, he was almost like Visser 3. Up to the point where he kills his employees. He doesn't do that bit. But below that, he's basically Visser 3, Steve Jobs. He was awful, apparently. Like, he would... if he didn't like an idea that an employee had, he would just humiliate them in front of all their peers. Like, he knew how to humiliate them, and he deliberately went to do it. He struck at that chord. Deliberately, maliciously, and just for people having ideas he didn't like. He does sound like the real world Visser 3. Toned down once, maybe. Yeah, he doesn't kill people, as far as we know. Bill Gates, on the other hand, Bill Gates is, I mean, in the 90s, yeah, he had a pretty good reputation. Then, bad things happened with Microsoft, who almost went bankrupt, I think. And a lot of it went back to him. And then he just sort of bought everything. Apparently he tried to steal the company's assets from his co-owner, Levine, I think the guy's name was. He got diagnosed with some terminal illness. And Bill Gates just said, "Ha, this is my chance to take all I can." Yeah, git. And then, of course, he's the biggest funder of the World Health Organization, which funded certain research that led to certain issues a few years ago, and profited off of the thing that was made to help us, which some would argue didn't, but I'm not going to comment on that. And then encouraged us to go into lockdowns, and upon those lockdowns happening, he became the biggest holder of American agricultural land, buying it off the people who couldn't hold it because of lockdown, the thing that he basically set in motion. Right. Basically, sociopath and git. Those are Elfangor's friends at college. If that's anything to go by, Elfangor, I wouldn't have wanted to hang out at your frat parties, because they sound like a bunch of... I was about to say a naughty word there. I'll just say Jeffrey E. Bill Gates liked him, but maybe that was the plan. Maybe Elfangor in this sitcom universe eventually discovered, my friends are arses. And then in his attempt to basically trip them up in their lust for power and wealth, he only helped them on their way, but destroyed their friendship in the process. Someone's got to write this fan fiction now. This sitcom... I've done a comedy fan fiction for Animos before. I could do it again. And it would be Alan, Steve and Bill at college. Huzzah! I told you I'd try to make this episode interesting. I'm probably going to get cancelled for the stuff I barely even implied about Bill Gates, but not that I really technically believe it all myself. A lot of it's rumour, but I think everyone can agree that he is a prat. So, yeah. And that's coming from someone who's benefited from being made. I will say thank you to you both for your, frankly, brilliance in the mind. I'm just glad I didn't meet you as people. We'll leave it at that. Rest in peace, Steve. Bye, Bill. Thank you very much for watching. There basically is nothing else to say about these two, because they were basically just a reference joke. I've filled out this video as much as I think is necessary, so I think it's now time to spin the wheel. So now that we've covered the originators of such technologies in the Animos universe, they probably would have been called, rather than Windows it would be patios, and rather than Apple it will be sausage. Let's spin the wheel to see what we'll be discovering next time on Dragon Ball AniLysis. Let's get cancelled. How are we going to get cancelled? By looking at Samilin Koraf Gahar, who I believe was the commanding officer aboard the Askelin, which is the one in book 18. I'm pretty certain that's who we look at. If I'm wrong, then I'm sorry, but from name recognition, that's what we're looking at. That. Thank you very much for watching, and we shall see you for that episode somewhere else in the Animos universe. Planet Lyra, I'm presuming. Ta-ra.